The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty main street of Millbrook, Texas, when rancher Jake Morrison spotted a figure hunched on the courthouse steps. Something about the way she held herself, shoulders curved inward, head bowed, made him slow his pickup truck. As he drew closer, his heart nearly stopped. Those delicate hands, that auburn hair catching the light, the familiar curve of her neck. It was Sarah Chun, the girl who had once promised to wait for him under the old oak tree behind the high school. The girl who had vanished from his life 23 years ago without a word. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. But this wasn't the Sarah he remembered. This woman wore clothes that had seen too many washings, shoes with holes that let in the morning dew, and held a cardboard sign that read, "Anything helps, God bless." Jake's hands gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. What had happened to the girl who used to dance barefoot in summer rain and dream of opening her own bakery? What twist of fate had brought her to this corner, to this moment, to him? He pulled into the parking space across the street and sat there, engine running, watching the woman who had once been his entire world. She didn't look up, didn't see him there. She simply existed in that space between hope and despair, holding her sign like a shield against the judgment of passers-by. Jake Morrison had built an empire from nothing, owned 3,000 acres of prime Texas land, and employed half the county. But right now, he felt like that 18-year-old boy again, the one who had searched every corner of every town between here and California, looking for the girl who had disappeared. The question that would haunt him for the rest of his life formed in his mind. What if he hadn't stopped? What if he had driven past, pretended not to see, let her fade back into the crowd of strangers? But Jake Morrison was not the kind of man who drove past. Not anymore. Not after what he'd learned about second chances and the weight of regret. Jake Morrison's story didn't begin on that courthouse steps this morning. It began in the summer of 1987, when he was 17 years old and thought he had forever figured it out. His father owned a small ranch outside Millbrook, 200 acres of stubborn land that fought them for every blade of grass. Jake worked the ranch every morning before school and every evening after, his hands already calloused and his back already strong from years of mending fences and hauling feed. But Sarah Chun made everything else disappear. She had moved to Millbrook that spring with her grandmother, a quiet woman who ran the town's only flower shop. Sarah was different from the other girls in their senior class. She read books during lunch instead of gossiping, helped her grandmother arrange bouquets after school, and had this way of looking at the world like she was seeing magic in places where everyone else saw ordinary. When she smiled, which wasn't often enough, it lit up her entire face and made Jake forget about everything else. Their first real conversation happened on a Tuesday in late April. Jake had been walking past Chun's flower shop when he noticed Sarah struggling with boxes of supplies on the sidewalk. Without thinking, he crossed the street and started helping her carry them inside. The shop smelled like roses and something else he couldn't identify, something sweet and green and alive. "You don't have to help," Sarah said, but her voice held gratitude instead of dismissal. "I know," Jake replied, setting down a box of ceramic vases. "But my mama raised me to help when help needed." That's when Sarah smiled for the first time in his presence, and Jake Morrison knew his life had just changed direction. They started meeting after school. Sarah would finish her work at the flower shop, and Jake would complete his ranch chores, and they'd find each other at the old oak tree behind the high school. It became their place, that tree with its wide branches and the way the evening light filtered through its leaves. They would sit there and talk about everything: Sarah's dreams of opening her own bakery, Jake's plans to expand his family's ranch, the book she was reading, the places they wanted to see. Sarah had grown up in Houston with her parents, both Doctors who worked long hours and expected perfection. When her grandmother got sick, Sarah had volunteered to move to Millbrook to help with the flower shop. She told Jake about the pressure she felt, the way her parents called every week with expectations and plans for her future that never seemed to include what she actually wanted. "They have my whole life mapped out," she said one evening, back against the oak tree, her eyes fixed on the sunset. Pre-med at UT, medical school, residency, marriage to someone they approve of. "It's like they've never actually asked me what I want." Jake picked at the grass beside him. "What do you want?" "To make things that bring people joy," Sarah said without hesitation. "To wake up every morning and create something beautiful. To have a little bakery with checkered tablecloths and flowers in mason jars, and the smell of fresh bread filling up the whole place. To have customers who come in, not just for the food, but for the feeling of being somewhere warm and welcoming." "That sounds perfect," Jake said, and he meant it. Sarah turned to look at him then, her dark eyes serious. "What about you? What do you really want?" Jake had never been asked that question before. His future had always been assumed. He would take over the ranch, marry someone local, raise kids. Who would take over after him? But sitting there with Sarah, he realized he had never actually chosen any of it. "I want to build something that lasts," he said slowly. "Not just the ranch, but something bigger. I want to prove that you can start with nothing and create something meaningful. And I want to do it with someone who understands that dreams are worth working for." The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was full of possibility and unspoken promises. Their relationship deepened through the late spring and into summer. Jake would pick Sarah up after her shift at the flower shop, and they would drive out to the edges of his family's property, where the land stretched endlessly toward the horizon. They would sit on the tailgate of his truck and watch the stars come out, talking about their futures like they were weaving them together with words. Sarah started bringing homemade cookies and small cakes to their meetings, testing recipes and asking for Jake's honest opinions. Everything she made was extraordinary chocolate chip cookies that were crispy on the edges and soft in the center, lemon bars that tasted like sunshine, apple pie that made Jake understand why people wrote songs about such things. "You're going to have the best bakery in Texas," Jake told her one night after tasting her latest creation, a cinnamon cake that seemed to melt on his tongue. "You really think so?" Sarah asked, and Jake could hear the uncertainty in her voice. "I know so," he said, reaching for her hand. "And when you do, I'm going to be your first customer every single day." The promise felt sacred in the warm summer air, but their perfect summer was built on borrowed time. Sarah's parents had plans for her, and those plans didn't include a small-town rancher's son or dreams of opening bakeries. They had enrolled her in summer pre-med courses at UT, starting in August. She was expected to live in Austin, focus on her studies, and prepare for the future they had chosen for her. Sarah told Jake about the ultimatum on a hot July evening. They were sitting by the creek that ran through the back of his family's property, their feet dangling in the cool water. "They say if I don't go to Austin, they'll cut me off completely," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "No college money, no contact, nothing. And my grandmother, she's getting sicker. She needs the money my parents send for her medical bills." Jake felt something cold settle in his stomach. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know," Sarah said, and for the first time since he'd known her, she sounded defeated. "I can't let my grandmother suffer because I'm being selfish about my dreams." "It's not selfish to want your own life," Jake said fiercely. "Isn't it?" Sarah asked. "When other people depend on you? When do your choices affect more than just yourself?" Jake had grown up understanding responsibility and sacrifice. He knew what it meant to put family needs before personal wants. But he also knew what it felt like to love someone so completely that their happiness became more important than your own. "We'll figure it out," he said, taking her hand. "There has to be a way." But even as he said it, Jake could feel the future they had imagined beginning to slip away like water through his fingers. The last 2 weeks of July passed too quickly. Sarah spent her days helping her grandmother close down the flower shop for the season and her evenings with Jake, both of them pretending that August wasn't coming. They made desperate plans. Jake would follow her to Austin, maybe find work on a ranch outside the city. Sarah would defer school for a year, convince her parents she needed time to care for her grandmother, but deep down, they both knew these were the dreams of teenagers who hadn't yet learned that love doesn't always conquer all. On their last night together, they sat under the oak tree where it had all begun. Sarah was leaving for Austin in the morning, and neither of them knew when they would see each other again. "I'm going to come back," Sarah said, her hand intertwined with Jake's. "As soon as I can figure out how to make it work, I'm going to come back. I'll wait," Jake promised. "However long it takes, I'll wait. Even if it's years, even if it's years." Sarah kissed him then, soft and desperate and full of all the words they couldn't say. When she finally pulled away, there were tears on her cheeks. "I love you, Jake Morrison," she whispered. "I love you too, Sarah Chun," he whispered back. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The next morning, Jake drove to Sarah's grandmother's house to say goodbye, but the car was already gone. He stood on the empty porch, looking at the space where her suitcases had been, and felt something fundamental shift inside him. The future he had imagined, their future, had just driven away down Main Street, leaving him standing alone in the Texas heat. For the first 6 months, they wrote letters. Sarah described her classes, her tiny apartment, the overwhelming pace of Austin. Jake wrote about the ranch, the town, the way everything reminded him of her. But gradually, the letters became less frequent. Sarah's responses grew shorter, more distant. She wrote about new friends, study groups, the demands of her pre-med program. By Christmas, the letters had stopped altogether. Jake drove to Austin twice, but Sarah was never at the address she had given him. Her roommate said she had moved, but didn't know where. Jake spent 2 days driving around the city, looking for her in coffee shops and bookstores. But Austin was huge, and he was just one lost boy looking for one lost girl. The third time he went to Austin, he discovered that Sarah had transferred to a university in California. No forwarding address. No way to reach her. She had vanished as completely as if she had never existed. Jake Morrison learned something about himself in those months of searching. He learned that he was the kind of man who didn't give up easily, who would drive across 3 states following rumors and possibilities. But he also learned that sometimes love isn't enough. Sometimes people choose paths that lead away from you, no matter how much you want to follow. So he stopped looking. He came home to Millbrook, threw himself into the ranch work, and tried to build a life that didn't have Sarah-shaped holes in it. But late at night, when the work was done and the house was quiet, he would still find himself wondering what had happened to the girl who had promised to come back. 20-3 years had passed since that last night under the oak tree. Jake had built his small ranch into a sprawling operation, had married and divorced, had succeeded beyond his teenage dreams. But he had never forgotten Sarah Chun, and he had never stopped wondering what might have been. Now, sitting in his truck across from the courthouse, watching the woman with the cardboard sign, Jake Morrison realized that some questions get answered whether you're ready for them or not. Jake sat in his truck for 20 minutes, watching Sarah through the windshield. She held her sign with quiet dignity, never aggressive, never pushy. When people walked by without acknowledging her, she didn't call out or plead. When someone dropped change into the coffee cup at her feet, she offered a soft thank you and a genuine smile that Jake recognized despite the years that had carved lines around her eyes. A businessman in expensive suit approached the courthouse steps. Jake watched as the man's face twisted with disgust when he saw Sarah. "Get a job," the man muttered loud enough for half the street to hear. "Stop being a drain on society." Sarah's shoulders tensed, but she didn't respond. She simply lowered her head and held her sign a little tighter. Jake's hands clenched on the steering wheel. That was the moment he knew he couldn't just drive away. He parked his truck and walked across the street, his boots clicking against the pavement. As he got closer, he could see more details that broke his heart. Sarah's clothes were clean, but worn thin from too many washings. Her hair, once glossy and thick, was now brittle and streaked with premature gray. But her hands, those delicate hands that had once created magic in her grandmother's kitchen, those were the same. "Sarah?" he said softly. She looked up, and for a moment, her face went completely blank. Then recognition dawned in her eyes, followed quickly by something that looked like shame. She scrambled to her feet, trying to hide the cardboard sign behind her back. "Jake," she whispered. I didn't expect." "Nobody expects to see their past sitting on courthouse steps," Jake said, his voice gentler than he felt. "But here we are." Sarah's cheeks flushed red. "I know how this looks. I know what you must think. I think you look like someone who's been having a hard time," Jake said. "And I think you look like someone who could use a friend." The simple kindness in his words seemed to undo something in Sarah. Her eyes filled with tears, and she had to look away. "I'm not the girl you remember," she said. "I'm not the boy you remember either," Jake replied. "But that doesn't mean we can't be who we are right now." Jake suggested they get coffee, and Sarah hesitated. She gestured to her appearance, self-conscious about walking into a restaurant looking like she did. But Jake had a solution. He drove her to Martha's Diner, the same place where they used to share milkshakes after football games, and asked Martha to pack them coffee and sandwiches to go. They drove out to the old oak tree behind the high school. Their tree, and sat on the tailgate of Jake's truck, just like they had decades ago. But everything was different now. The tree was bigger, more gnarled. The school had been renovated and expanded, and they were no longer teenagers full of dreams and promises. "Tell me what happened," Jake said after they had sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes. Sarah was quiet for so long that Jake thought she might not answer. Then she began to speak, her voice barely above a whisper. "I tried to make it work in Austin," she said. "I really did. But I was miserable. The pre-med courses were brutal, and I hated every minute of it. I felt like I was drowning in someone else's life." She told him about meeting David Reyes, a graduate student in business who was charming and ambitious, and exactly the kind of man her parents had always envisioned for her. David was from a wealthy family in San Antonio, and he pursued Sarah with the same intensity he applied to everything else in his life. "He was persistent," Sarah said with a bitter laugh. "And I was lonely. When he asked me to marry him after 6 months, I said yes. I thought maybe if I couldn't have the life I wanted, at least I could have a life that looked successful from the outside." They moved to California after David finished his MBA. He landed a high-paying job at a tech company in Silicon Valley, and Sarah found work as a baker at a small cafe. For a while, she thought she might finally have found a balance, a marriage that satisfied her parents and work that fed her soul. "The bakery job was the happiest I'd been since." Sarah paused, glancing at Jake. "Since Millbrook. I was creating again, making things that brought people joy. But David hated it. He said it was embarrassing to tell people his wife was just a baker when he was climbing the corporate ladder." The pressure mounted. David wanted Sarah to quit her job and focus on being the perfect corporate wife. Her parents, thrilled with their successful son-in-law, supported David's position. Sarah felt caught between everyone else's expectations and her own fading dreams. "I gave up the bakery job," Sarah said, her voice hollow. "I became the wife David wanted, organized his dinner parties, networked with the right people, played the part. But I was dying inside. I started taking pills just to get through the day. Anxiety medication at first, then sleeping pills, then whatever I could find to make the emptiness go away. Jake listened without judgment as Sarah described the slow descent into addiction. The pills that started as a way to cope became a necessity. When doctors stopped prescribing them, she found other ways to get what she needed. David was too busy with his career to notice, and Sarah became an expert at hiding her problem. I functioned for years, Sarah said. I was a high-functioning addict married to a man who only saw me as an accessory to his success. But addiction doesn't stay functional forever. The turning point came when David discovered Sarah's drug use. Not because he was concerned about her health, but because her behavior had become embarrassing at company functions. He gave her an ultimatum: get clean immediately or get out. I tried to quit cold turkey, Sarah said. But I'd been using for almost 10 years by then. I needed medical help, professional treatment. David said he wouldn't pay for rehab because it would look bad for his career if anyone found out his wife was an addict. Sarah's parents, horrified by their daughter's addiction, sided with David. They said if Sarah couldn't clean up her act on her own, she was weak and it brought shame on the family. No one offered help. Everyone offered judgment. So I left, Sarah said simply. I packed a bag and walked out of that perfect house with its perfect garden and its perfect life that was killing me. With no money, no job skills beyond baking, and a drug addiction that made holding steady employment nearly impossible, Sarah found herself homeless within months. She drifted from city to city, working odd jobs when she could, sleeping in shelters or on the streets when she couldn't. I've been clean for 2 years now, Sarah said, and Jake could hear the pride in her voice despite everything else. I got into a program in Dallas, worked with a counselor, did the hard work of figuring out why I'd been trying to numb myself for so long. But starting over with nothing when you're 41 years old, it's harder than I expected. She had been trying to get back on her feet, working temporary jobs and saving money for a deposit on an apartment. But a few weeks ago, she had gotten sick, some kind of flu that wouldn't go away, and missed too many days of work. Her employer let her go, and without income, she couldn't afford the weekly rate at the boarding house where she'd been staying. I've been sleeping in my car for 3 weeks, Sarah said. I drove back to Texas because, I don't know. I guess I thought maybe I could find work here, somewhere familiar. But Millbrook has changed so much. And she gestured to herself. I'm not exactly the kind of employee most places are looking for. Jake absorbed all of this in silence. The successful businessman in him wanted to offer practical solutions, job opportunities, financial assistance, connections that could help. But the part of him that had never stopped loving Sarah Chen just wanted to wrap her in his arms. Tell her everything would be okay. Where's your car now? Jake asked. Broke down yesterday outside of town, Sarah said. I've been walking everywhere since then. I had enough money for one more night at the motel, but I spent it on the tow truck instead. I keep thinking if I can just get the car fixed, I can drive to Dallas, maybe find work there. What's wrong? With the car? The mechanic says it's the transmission. $1,500 to fix it. Sarah laughed, but there was no humor in it. I've got $37 to my name. Jake understood now why Sarah had been on the courthouse steps with a cardboard sign. She wasn't a career panhandler or someone who had given up on life. She was a woman who had made mistakes, paid consequences, and was trying to claw her way back to stability with nothing but determination and the willingness to swallow her pride. I know what you're thinking, Sarah said, misreading his silence. How did the girl who used to make those amazing lemon bars end up begging for change on the courthouse steps? How did someone who had so much promise turn into such a mess? That's not what I'm thinking, Jake said quietly. What are you thinking? Jake turned to look at her, this woman who had once been his everything and who had just trusted him with the story of her worst years. I'm thinking that you've been carrying a lot of weight by yourself for a long time. And I'm thinking that maybe you don't have to carry it alone anymore." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Jake, I can't ask you to." "You're not asking, Jake." Interrupted. "I'm offering. You don't understand. I'm not just broke. I'm broken. I don't have anything to give you, nothing to offer. I'm not the girl you fell in love with." Jake reached over and took her hand, the same hand that had once fit so perfectly in his. "You're right," he said. "You're not that girl. You're a woman who survived things that would have destroyed a lot of people. You're someone who got clean when everyone in your life walked away. You're someone who's been knocked down and keeps getting back up. That's not broken, Sarah. That's strength." The sun was setting behind the oak tree, casting long shadows across the field. In the golden light, Jake could see glimpses of the girl he had loved, but he could also see the woman she had become, scarred, but not defeated, changed but not diminished. "I want to help," Jake said. "Not because I feel sorry for you, and not because I'm trying to rescue you, but because everyone deserves a chance to start over, and because ... He paused, trying to find the right words. "Because I never stopped caring about what happened to you." Sarah was crying now, tears streaming down her face. "I don't know how to accept help," she whispered. "I've been doing everything alone for so long." "Then maybe it's time to learn," Jake said gently. As they sat there in the fading light, Jake began to formulate a plan. Not a grand gesture or a dramatic rescue, but something practical and sustainable. Something that would give Sarah a chance to rebuild her life with dignity and purpose. He thought about the bakery space in town that had been empty for 6 months, the owner desperate to find a tenant. He thought about his own success and the responsibility that came with it. He thought about second chances and the weight of regret, about the roads not taken and the possibility of new beginnings. But mostly, he thought about the woman sitting beside him, who had trusted him with her story and who deserved so much more than courthouse steps and cardboard signs. "Come home with me tonight," Jake said. "Just for tonight. Let me give you a safe place to sleep and a hot meal. Tomorrow we can figure out what comes next." Sarah looked at him for a long moment, searching his face for something: pity, judgment, ulterior motives. But Jake Morrison had learned a lot about himself in the 23 years since Sarah had left Millbrook. He had learned that success without purpose was empty, that money without meaning was just numbers on a bank statement. He had learned that some chances only come once, and some come again when you least expect them. "Okay," Sarah whispered finally, "just for tonight." As they drove back toward town, Jake caught sight of Sarah's reflection in the passenger window. She looked exhausted but peaceful, like someone who had been holding her breath for years and was finally allowing herself to exhale. Neither of them knew that by morning, the entire town of Millbrook would be talking about what Jake Morrison had done for Sarah Chun. Neither of them knew that this was just the beginning of a story that would challenge everything the town thought it knew about success, failure, and the power of second chances. For now it was enough that Sarah was safe, that she wasn't alone, and that for the first time in years, she had someone in her corner who believed she deserved more than just surviving. The road ahead was uncertain, full of challenges and complications that neither of them could foresee. But as Jake's truck carried them through the Texas evening, both of them felt something they hadn't experienced in decades. Hope. Jake's ranch house sat on a hill overlooking 3,000 acres of Texas prairie, a sprawling single-story structure built from native stone and weathered wood. As they pulled into the circular driveway, Sarah stared out the window in amazement. The last time she had been here, it was a modest farmhouse with peeling paint and a sagging porch. Now it was something out of a magazine, elegant but unpretentious. Clearly expensive, but still unmistakably Texan. "You've done well for yourself," Sarah said softly. "I've been lucky," Jake replied, but there was something in his tone that suggested luck had very little to do with it. Inside, the house was even more impressive. vaulted ceilings with exposed beams, a kitchen that belonged in a high-end restaurant, and windows that offered panoramic views of the ranch lands. But despite its grandeur, the house felt empty somehow. Too clean, too quiet, too much like a showplace, and not enough like a home. "When did you get married?" Sarah asked, noticing the absence of feminine touches that usually marked a shared space. "I didn't," Jake said, then caught himself. I did. Married Rebecca Walsh about 15 years ago. Divorced her 8 years later." "I'm sorry," Jake shrugged. "It happens. We wanted different things. She wanted a society husband who would take her to charity galas and country club events. I wanted a partner who understood that this ranch was more than just a business to me." He showed Sarah to a guest room that was larger than most apartments she'd lived in during her struggling years. The bed was covered with a handmade quilt, and fresh flowers sat on the knitstand. It was clear that Jake had prepared this space with care, wanting her to feel welcome rather than like a charity case. "There are clothes in the closet," Jake sighed, gesturing toward the walk-in wardrobe. "Rebecca left most of her things when she moved out. I kept thinking she might come back for them, but that was 2 years ago. She's about your size." Sarah ran her fingers over the expensive fabric silk blouses, cashmere sweaters, designer jeans that still had tags on them. "I can't wear these," she said. "They're too nice, too expensive." "They're just clothes," Jake said gently. "And they're not doing anyone any good hanging in a closet. Besides, you'll need something appropriate to wear tomorrow." "Tomorrow?" "I have some ideas about how to help you get back on your feet. But first, you need to rest." "When's the last time you had a real meal?" Sarah had to think about it. "I had a sandwich 3 days ago, some crackers yesterday." Jake's jaw tightened, but he didn't comment on how she'd been living. Instead, he went to the kitchen and began pulling ingredients from the refrigerator. Sarah watched from the doorway as he moved with practiced efficiency, preparing what looked like enough food for 4 people. "I'm not much of a cook," Jake said, seasoning chicken breasts before placing them in a cast-iron skillet. "But I know my way around basic ranch food. Hope you're not vegetarian now." "I'm not anything now," Sarah said with a small smile. "I'm just grateful." As Jake cooked, he told Sarah about his life since she'd left Millbrook. After high school, he worked on his father's ranch and slowly expanded it, buying adjacent properties whenever they came up for sale. He'd diversified into cattle breeding, developed a reputation for producing some of the finest beef in Texas, and eventually built the operation into something that employed 60 people and generated millions in revenue annually. "But it's not just about the money," Jake said, flipping the chicken. "It's about the land, the legacy, the idea that you can build something meaningful that lasts beyond your own lifetime." "You sound like you did when we were 17, Sarah said. "Still dreaming big." "Some dreams are worth holding on to," Jake replied, meeting her eyes across the kitchen. During dinner, they talked about lighter things, changes in Millbrook, mutual friends from high school, the way the town had evolved. From a sleepy agricultural community into something that attracted weekenders from Austin and Dallas. Sarah ate slowly, savoring every bite of the perfectly prepared meal and the simple pleasure of sitting at a real table with real dishes. "This is the best meal I've had in years," she said, and Jake could tell she meant it literally. After dinner, Jake excused himself to make some phone calls while Sarah took a long hot shower. Standing under the powerful spray, surrounded by expensive soaps and shampoos, Sarah allowed herself to truly relax for the first time in months. The hot water washed away more than just dirt and fatigue. It washed away some of the despair that had been clinging to her like a second skin. When she emerged from the bathroom, she found that Jake had left a selection of Rebecca's clothes on the bed, all in neutral colors and classic styles that would work for almost any occasion. Sarah chose a simple navy blouse and dark jeans, both of which fit perfectly. Looking At herself in the mirror, she was startled by the transformation. Clean, well-dressed, and with some color back in her cheeks from the hot meal. She looked almost like a normal person again. Jake was waiting in the living room when she came out, and the expression on his face made her self-conscious. "What?" she asked, touching her hair. "Nothing," Jake said quickly. "You just ... you look good, rested." "I feel human again," Sarah admitted. "I'd forgotten what that was like." Jake had been busy during his phone calls. He'd arranged for Sarah's car to be towed to Pete's garage, where his friend and mechanic Pete Martinez would assess the damage and provide an estimate. He'd also made some other calls, but he wasn't ready to share those details yet. "I have a proposition for you," Jake said as they settled on the couch with coffee. "But I want you to hear me out completely before you say no." Sarah tensed slightly. "Okay, there's a commercial space in town that's been empty for 6 months. It used to be Miller's Hardware, but old man Miller retired and couldn't find a buyer. The building's in good shape, right on Main Street, with good foot traffic. The owner's been trying to lease it, but he's had trouble finding the right tenant. Jake, I don't have money for rent, let alone starting a business. I know. That's where I come in. I want to lease the space and help you open a bakery." Sarah stared at him. "What? You heard me, a bakery. The thing you've always dreamed of doing. I'll cover the initial investment lease, equipment, inventory, whatever you need to get started. You run the business, keep the profits, and when you're profitable enough, you can start paying me back." "Jake, no, I can't let you do that." "Why?" "Not because it's too much. Because I have no collateral, no way to guarantee I won't fail. Because you'd be risking your money on someone who's been homeless for the past month." Jake leaned forward, his expression serious. "Sarah, I've built a successful business by recognizing good investments. And I'm telling you, betting on your talent and your determination is the smartest investment I could make. But what if I can't handle it? What if I'm not ready? What if I mess up again? Then you'll learn from it and try again. That's what successful people do. They fail, they get back up, and they keep going." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, staring into her coffee cup. "Why would you do this for me?" Jake had been expecting this question, and he'd thought carefully about his answer. "Because everyone deserves a second chance. Because I believe in you, and because—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Because I spent 23 years wondering what happened to you. And now that I know, I want to help you write a better ending to your story. This isn't about guilt, is it? About us, about what happened before?" "No," Jake said honestly. "This is about seeing someone with incredible talent who just needs an opportunity to show the world what she can do." Sarah stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the ranch lands bathed in moonlight. "I don't know if I remember how to run a business. It's been so long since I've been responsible for anything, except just surviving. You'll remember. And I'll help you with the parts you're unsure about. People in town ... they'll talk. They'll wonder why Jake Morrison is helping some homeless woman start a bakery. Let them talk," Jake said. "I stopped caring what other people thought about my choices a long time ago." Sarah turned back to face him. "If I say yes, and I'm not saying yes yet, but if I did, I'd want to do this right. I'd want to pay you back every penny, with interest. I'd want this to be a real business relationship, not charity." "That's exactly what I'd want too," Jake said. "I'm not offering you a handout, Sarah. I'm offering you a business partnership. I'd need to think about it. Of course. Take all the time you need." But even as Sarah said she needed time, Jake could see the spark of excitement in her eyes. For the first time since he'd found her on the courthouse steps, she looked like someone who was thinking about the future instead of just surviving the present. "Tell me about the space," she said, settling back on the couch. Jake smiled. "It's about 1,500 square feet, with big windows facing Main Street. There's A kitchen area in the back that would need to be updated to commercial standards, but the bones are good. High ceilings, original hardwood floors, lots of character. What's the rent? $2,500 a month, Sarah winced. That's a lot. Not for a Main Street location in a town that's growing like Millbrook is. And you'd be surprised how much money people will spend on really good baked goods. They talked for another hour, discussing logistics and possibilities. Jake had clearly done his homework. He knew about commercial kitchen requirements, health department regulations, and the local market for specialty food businesses. Sarah found herself getting caught up in his enthusiasm, imagining what it would be like to have her own space, her own customers, her own purpose again. I saw Martha's Diner today, Sarah said. Same place we used to go after school, but her baked goods looked, well, let's just say there's definitely room for improvement. In the local dessert market. Martha's a good cook, but she's not a baker, Jake agreed. And there's nothing else in town. People drive to Austin when they want really good cakes or pastries for special occasions. What about competition from the grocery store? Have you seen the bakery section at Morrison's Food Market? It's all mass-produced stuff shipped in from Dallas. Nothing fresh, nothing special. Sarah felt a familiar stirring, the same feeling she'd had in high school when she'd first started experimenting with recipes. The desire to create something beautiful and delicious, to make people smile with food that was made with care and skill. I'd want to do it right, she said slowly. Fresh ingredients, everything made from scratch, maybe some specialties that you can't get anywhere else. Like what? Well, I perfected this recipe for lavender honey scones when I was working at that cafe in California. And I make a chocolate cake that's so good it should be illegal. Oh, and these apple cinnamon rolls that are like cinnamon rolls and apple pie had a perfect baby. Jake laughed. Now you're talking like the Sarah I remember. I'd want to do catering too, eventually. Weddings, corporate events, birthday parties. Build up a reputation for quality. All of that sounds perfect. Sarah was quiet for a moment, and Jake could see her mind working, calculating possibilities. And obstacles. If I did this, she said finally, I'd want to hire local people. Give jobs to folks who need them, the way you're giving me a chance. That's exactly the kind of thinking that makes me confident this will work. And I'd want to give back to the community somehow. Maybe donate day-old pastries to the food bank or provide desserts for church fundraisers. Jake nodded. The more you talk about it, the more I'm convinced this is the right thing to do. Sarah looked at him, this man who had loved her when they were both young and foolish, who had grown into someone successful and generous and still fundamentally kind. Why, did you never have kids? She asked suddenly. The question caught Jake off guard. Rebecca didn't want them. She said children would interfere with her social life. But you wanted them. I did. I still do, actually. But I'm 41 years old, and the right person never came along. The right person? Jake met her eyes. Someone who understood that. Success isn't just about money or status. Someone who knew that the most important things in life are the connections you make and the good you do for other people. Sarah felt something shift in her chest, a warming that had nothing to do with the coffee she was drinking. Jake, ... I'm not saying this to pressure you about anything, Jake said quickly. I'm just answering your question honestly. I know, Sarah said softly, and I appreciate honesty. I've had enough of people telling me what they think I want to hear. As the evening wound down, Jake showed Sarah how to work the coffee maker, the security system, and the television remote. Make yourself at home, he said. Sleep in as long as you want. I'll be up at dawn checking on the cattle, but I'll be back around 9. Jake, Sarah said as he headed toward his own bedroom. Thank you for everything. For not driving past the courthouse, for listening to my story, for this opportunity. I don't know how to repay you. You don't need to repay me, Jake said. Just promise me you'll think seriously about the bakery. And promise me you'll let me help you get back on your feet. I promise to think about it. That's all I can ask." After Jake disappeared into his bedroom, Sarah sat in the living room. For a long time, staring out at the stars visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows. For the first time in years, she was thinking about the future instead of just the next day. She was thinking about possibilities instead of just survival. The bakery idea terrified her, but it also excited her in a way she hadn't felt since she was 17 years old, sitting under the oak tree and dreaming about the life she wanted to build. Maybe it was time to stop running from her dreams and start running toward them. Maybe it was time to find out who Sarah Chun could become when she had someone believing in her again. Sarah woke to the smell of fresh coffee and bacon, luxuries she hadn't experienced in months. Sunlight streamed through the bedroom windows, and for a moment, she forgot where she was. Then reality settled in. She was safe, clean, and sleeping in a real bed for the first time in weeks. The digital clock on the nightstand read 8:47 a.m. Jake had said he'd be back around 9, which meant she had time to shower and make herself presentable. As she dressed in another of Rebecca's outfits, a cream-colored sweater and brown slacks that made her look almost professional, Sarah caught sight of herself in the full-length mirror. The woman looking back at her bore little resemblance to the desperate figure who had sat on courthouse steps yesterday. With proper rest, good food, and clean clothes, she looked like someone who belonged in polite society again. But more importantly, she felt like someone who might actually be capable of running a business. Jake returned as promised, carrying a box of fresh pastries from Austin. "I drove into the city early this morning," he explained, setting the box on the kitchen counter. "Wanted to do some market research." Sarah opened the box and examined the contents: croissants, Danish pastries, muffins, and a selection of cookies. She tasted each one methodically, her trained palate analyzing textures, flavors, and techniques. "Well," Jake asked, watching her work. "These are good," Sarah said carefully. "But they're not great. The croissants are too dense, they didn't proof long enough. The Danish filling is too sweet, probably made with artificial vanilla. And these chocolate chip cookies. Double quotes. She held one up. "Mass-produced recipe. You can tell because all the chocolate chips are the same size and perfectly distributed. So you could do better?" Sarah smiled for the first time since Jake had found her. "Jake Morrison, I could do so much better that it's not even a fair comparison." That's what I wanted to hear. "Come on, let's go look at the space." They drove into town in Jake's truck, Sarah nervous about being seen but grateful for his steady presence beside her. Millbrook had changed dramatically since her youth. The main street that had once housed a feed store, a Five and Dime, and Miller's Hardware now featured an art gallery, a wine bar, and a boutique selling overpriced Western wear to tourists. The former Miller's Hardware sat between Coleman's Bank and a shop called Hill Country Treasures. The building was classic small-town Texas red brick with large windows and a corner entrance that commanded attention from both directions of Main Street traffic. Jake produced a key from his pocket. "I called the owner this morning. Tom Bradley, you remember him? He used to run the gas station. He's excited about the possibility of getting a quality tenant." Inside, the space was larger than Sarah had imagined. The front section had high ceilings and original tin tiles that caught the morning light beautifully. Behind a partition wall, the former hardware storage area could be converted into a commercial kitchen. The bones were excellent, but it would need significant renovation. "I can see it," Sarah said, walking through the empty space. "Tables here by the windows, a display case along this wall, maybe some comfortable seating in the back corner. The kitchen would need all new equipment, proper ventilation, and commercial-grade appliances. What's your estimate for startup costs?" Sarah had been thinking about this since their conversation the night before. "Equipment alone will be $40,000, maybe $50. Renovation, permits, Initial inventory. We're looking at $75,000 minimum. Probably closer to $100,000 if we want to do it right. Jake nodded as if she'd quoted. The price of lunch. That's what I figured. Completely manageable. Jake, that's a huge amount of money. It's an investment in a proven concept with a talented operator. I've made riskier bets on cattle futures. They spent an hour in the space, with Sarah pointing out necessary changes and Jake taking notes on his phone. By the time they left, Sarah was buzzing with excitement, despite her attempts to remain cautious. I want to show you something else, Jake said as they walked back to his truck. He drove her to the edge of town where a new subdivision was being built. Large homes on spacious lots, clearly designed for affluent buyers escaping the congestion of Austin and Dallas. Millbrook's been discovered, Jake explained. Property values have tripled in the past 5 years. We're getting weekend residents. Retirees, remote workers who want small-town charm, but big city amenities. These are people who appreciate quality and don't mind paying for it. You're saying there's a market for expensive bakery goods? I'm saying there's a market for excellent bakery goods at fair prices. People who move here from cities expect options. Right now, if they want a decent birthday cake, they drive 40 minutes to Austin. They return to the ranch for lunch, where Sarah cooked for the first time in months. She found Jake's kitchen well-stocked but underutilized clearly, the domain of someone who ate for sustenance rather than pleasure. Working with quality ingredients and proper equipment, she prepared a simple meal that showcased her skills: herb-crusted salmon, roasted vegetables, and a quick bread that filled the house with the scent of rosemary and olive oil. This is incredible, Jake said after his first bite. I haven't had a home-cooked meal this good since, well, ever. Wait until you taste my desserts, Sarah said with a confidence she hadn't felt in years. After lunch, Jake made another phone call. When he returned, he was smiling. Pete looked at your car. Good news and bad news. Bad news first. It's not just the transmission. You need a new engine too. Total repair cost would be about $3,000. Sarah's face fell. And the good news? The car's only worth about $500. So instead of fixing it, I'm buying you a replacement. Jake, no. Absolutely not. It's not charity. Consider it a company car for the bakery manager. I haven't said yes to the bakery yet. But you're going to, Jake said with certainty. I can see it in your eyes. You've already started planning the menu in your head. He was right. During their tour of the building, Sarah had begun mentally organizing workspace flow, calculating oven capacity, and planning a rotating schedule of daily specials. The entrepreneur in her, dormant for so many years, was awakening. There's something else we need to discuss, Jake said, his tone becoming more serious. The practical realities of you being back in Millbrook. What do you mean? People are going to recognize you. They're going to remember the girl who left town to marry rich and never came back. They're going to see you with me and make assumptions. Sarah had been dreading this conversation. What kind of assumptions? That you're my mistress. That I'm having a midlife crisis and throwing money at a pretty woman. That you're using your history with me to take advantage of my success. Maybe they'd be right about some of that. They'd be completely wrong about all of it, Jake said firmly. But perception matters in a small town, especially when you're starting a business that depends on local customers. So what do you suggest? We get ahead of the story. We control the narrative instead of letting gossip control it. Jake's plan was typically straightforward and bold. They would be completely transparent about their history and present arrangement. Jake would introduce Sarah around town as a childhood friend who had returned to Millbrook to start a bakery with his financial backing. They would emphasize the business partnership aspect and Sarah's qualifications as a professional baker. But people will still talk, Sarah said. Of course they will. But they'll be talking about facts instead of speculation. And once your bakery opens and people taste what you can do, the quality of your work will speak louder than any gossip. That afternoon, Jake drove Sarah to meet Tom Bradley about the lease agreement. Tom, now in his 70s and still bearing the grease-stained hands of a lifelong mechanic, greeted Sarah warmly. "I remember you," he said, shaking her hand. "You used to come into the station with your grandmother to buy those terrible flowers for the church altar." "They weren't terrible," Sarah protested, laughing. "They were enthusiastic. Your grandmother was a good woman." Sad what happened to the flower shop after she passed. The lease negotiation was surprisingly smooth. Tom wanted a reliable tenant more than maximum profit, and Jake's endorsement carried significant weight. They agreed on a 3-year lease with an option to renew, rent starting at $2,000 per month for the first year. "When can we start renovations?" Sarah asked as they signed the papers. "Whenever you're ready," Tom said. "I've got a contractor who can handle the kitchen work. Pete Morrison's cousin Eddie does excellent work and won't overcharge you." As they left Tom's office, Sarah felt the first real flutter of panic. "This is really happening, isn't it?" "Only if you want it to," Jake said. "But I think you do." "Want it? I think you need it." "I'm scared," Sarah admitted. "What if I've been away from baking too long? What if I can't handle the pressure of running a business? What if people don't like what I make?" Jake stopped walking and turned to face her. "Sarah, do you remember what you told me the night before you left for Austin? You said that fear was just excitement without breath. You said the only way to know if you could fly was to jump. I was 17 and stupid. You were 17 and brave. And you're still brave, or you wouldn't have survived everything you've been through." That evening, Sarah called her former sponsor from the recovery program in Dallas. Maria Santos had been Sarah's lifeline during the hardest months of getting clean, and Sarah needed her perspective on this major life change. "It sounds like an incredible opportunity," Maria said after Sarah explained the situation. "But I have to ask, are you sure this isn't about the man? Because getting involved with someone from your past while you're still rebuilding your life can be complicated." "It's not about Jake," Sarah said, though even as she spoke, she wondered if that was entirely true. "It's about having a chance to do what I've always wanted to do. And this Jake, he's not expecting anything romantic in return for his help. He says he isn't, and I believe him. He's been nothing but respectful and professional. But you have feelings for him." Sarah was quiet for a moment. "I have feelings about him, gratitude mostly, and maybe some old affection that never completely went away. But Maria, I can't even think about romance right now. I'm just trying to get my life back together." "Good. Keep that perspective. Focus on your recovery and your business goals. Everything else can wait." After the call, Sarah found Jake in his study, working on ranch business at a massive oak desk. The room was lined with books, ranching manuals, business texts, and surprisingly, several volumes of poetry. "Maria thinks I should take the opportunity," Sarah said, settling into the leather chair across from his desk. "Maria sounds like a smart woman. She also warned me not to confuse gratitude with other feelings." Jake looked up from his computer. "That's good advice. For both of us." "Sarah, I'd be lying if I said seeing you again didn't bring up old feelings, but I'm also not 17 anymore. I know the difference between nostalgia and reality, between what was and what could be. So we're both clear that this is strictly business? We're both clear that your priority right now is getting your life back on track. Everything else is secondary." Sarah nodded, feeling both relieved and oddly disappointed. "Okay then. Business partners." "Business partners," Jake agreed, extending his hand across the desk dot as they shook hands. Sarah felt a spark of the old electricity between them, but she pushed it aside. Maria was right, she couldn't afford to complicate this opportunity with romantic entanglements. She had too much to prove, too much to rebuild. "So," Jake said, settling back in his chair, "let's talk about your business plan. What's your target opening date?" For the next 2 hours, they worked on concrete details. Sarah would need 6 weeks minimum for renovations and equipment installation. She wanted to start with a limited menu: coffee, drinks, fresh pastries, sandwiches for lunch, and expand offerings based on customer response. Jake suggested a soft opening for friends and family, followed by a grand opening celebration that would introduce her to the broader community. "I want to hire local people," Sarah said as they discussed staffing. "Maybe some of the high school kids who need part-time work, or someone who's been having trouble finding employment. That's exactly the kind of community involvement that will win people over," Jake said. "Show them you're not just another outsider starting a business, but someone who wants to invest in the town's success." By the time they finished planning, Sarah felt simultaneously exhausted and energized. For the first time in years, she had concrete goals, actionable plans, and someone who believed in her ability to succeed. "Jake," she said as they prepared to call it a night, "I want you to know that whatever happens with the bakery, whatever our relationship becomes or doesn't become, you've already given me something incredibly valuable." "What's that?" "Hope," Sarah said simply. "I'd forgotten what it felt like to have something to look forward to." Jake smiled, the expression transforming his face and reminding her powerfully of the boy she'd fallen in love with all those years ago. "Then we're even," he said, "because you've reminded me what it feels like to have a purpose beyond just making money." As Sarah headed to her room, she reflected on how much her life had changed in just 2 days. 48 hours ago, she'd been homeless and desperate, sitting on courthouse steps with a cardboard sign. Now she was planning to open a business, thinking about hiring employees, considering her future in terms of years rather than days. It felt too good to be true, too easy after so many years of struggle. But for the first time in longer than she could remember, Sarah Chun was ready to believe that maybe, just maybe, she deserved something good to happen in her life. Tomorrow, they would begin the process of turning dreams into reality. Tomorrow, she would start building the life she'd always wanted, but never thought she could have. Tonight, she would sleep peacefully in a comfortable bed, surrounded by safety and possibility, and dream of fresh bread and chocolate cakes and the faces of satisfied customers who would never know how much their smiles would mean to the woman who baked their morning pastries. The next morning brought Sarah's first real test of courage since accepting Jake's offer. They were going to Martha's Diner for breakfast, where half the town gathered every morning to drink coffee and share gossip. Jake had suggested it as a way to begin introducing Sarah back into the community, but she knew it was really about facing the inevitable whispers and stares head-on. "Remember," Jake said as they pulled into the diner's gravel parking lot, "we control this narrative. You're a professional baker returning home to start a business. That's the story, and we stick to it." Sarah smoothed down her borrowed sweater and took a deep breath. "What if someone recognizes me from yesterday, from the courthouse? Then we deal with it honestly. You were going through a rough patch, but you're back on your feet now. People respect resilience in this town." The bell above Martha's door chimed as they entered, and conversation didn't exactly stop, but it definitely shifted. Sarah felt the weight of curious eyes as Jake led her to a booth near the window. Martha herself approached their table, coffee pot in hand and questions written across her weathered face. "Well, I'll be damned," Martha said, studying Sarah with the intensity of a woman who'd been serving coffee to the same customers for 30 years. "Sarah Chun, though I suppose it's Sarah something else now." "Just Sarah," Sarah replied evenly. "It's good to see you, Martha. Heard you left town and got married to some fancy businessman," Martha continued, pouring coffee without being asked. "What brings you back to our little corner of nowhere?" Jake intervened smoothly. "Sarah's moving back to Millbrook to open a bakery. We're partnering on the venture." Martha's eyebrows climbed toward her hairline. A bakery in the old Miller's place? That's right, Sarah said, finding her voice. I've been working as a professional baker in California, and Jake thought Millbrook was ready for a real bakery. Well, Lord knows my desserts could use some competition, Martha said with a laugh. What kind of things you planning to make? As Sarah described her vision, fresh croissants, artisanal breads, custom cakes, she noticed that conversations at nearby tables had grown quieter. People were listening, evaluating, forming opinions that would be shared and debated long after she left. Sounds fancy, said a voice from the next booth. Sarah turned to see Carl Hendricks, who'd been 3 years ahead of her in school and now ran the local insurance agency. Hope you're not planning to charge fancy prices. I'm planning to charge fair prices for quality products, Sarah replied calmly. The same way any good business operates. Carl's companion, a woman Sarah didn't recognize, leaned forward. Aren't you the girl who used to help old Mrs. Chun with the flower shop? I heard you moved to California and struck it rich. I moved to California, Sarah confirmed. The striking it rich part didn't quite work out. Jake's hand found hers under the table, a subtle gesture of support that didn't go unnoticed by the watching crowd. Sarah's one of the most talented bakers I've ever encountered, he said, his voice carrying clearly through the small restaurant. I'm excited to help bring that talent back to Millbrook. The conversation gradually resumed at other tables, but Sarah could feel the undercurrent of speculation. By evening, everyone in town would know that Jake Morrison was backing his high school girlfriend in some kind of business venture. The details would be embellished, the motivations questioned, the likelihood of success debated. After breakfast, they drove to Austin to meet with equipment suppliers and contractors. Sarah was amazed by Jake's preparation. He'd researched commercial kitchen requirements, obtained a list of recommended suppliers, and even scheduled appointments with 3 different renovation contractors. When did you have time to do all this? Sarah asked as they walked through a restaurant supply warehouse. I've been thinking about this longer than you might imagine, Jake admitted. Not specifically about you, but about diversifying my investments into local businesses. A bakery was already on my list of possibilities. They spent the morning examining ovens, mixers, and display cases. Sarah's excitement grew with each piece of equipment they selected. The commercial stand mixer alone was larger than most home refrigerators, capable of handling 50 pounds of dough at once. The convection ovens could bake 12 sheet pans simultaneously, and the proofing cabinet would allow her to control temperature and humidity with scientific precision. This is going to cost more than we estimated, Sarah said as the supplier tallied their selections. Quality equipment is an investment, Jake replied. It'll last 20 years if you maintain it properly, and it'll allow you to produce consistent results from day one. The final total was $68,000 for equipment alone. Sarah felt sick watching Jake write the check, but he seemed completely unfazed by the amount. Their next stop was Eddie Morrison's construction office. Eddie was indeed Pete's cousin, a soft-spoken man in his 50s who listened carefully as Sarah described her vision for the kitchen layout. The electrical's going to be your biggest expense, Eddie said, sketching rough diagrams. You'll need 220-volt service for the ovens, dedicated circuits for the mixers, and proper ventilation for the whole operation. Figure $20,000 for electrical work alone. What about the timeline? Jake asked. If we start Monday, I can have you ready to open in 6 weeks. Maybe 5 if the inspectors cooperate. On the drive back to Millbrook, Sarah was quiet, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what they were undertaking. Jake seemed to sense her mood. Having second thoughts? He asked. Having every thought, Sarah replied. This is really happening, isn't it? In 6 weeks, I'm going to own a business. You're going to run a business, Jake corrected. I'm just the silent partner providing startup capital. Silent partner who's doing all the work and taking all the financial risk. Sarah, I want you to understand something. This isn't charity, and it's not some romantic gesture. This is a sound business investment. Millbrook needs a quality bakery. You have the skills to provide it, and I have the capital to make it happen. It's basic economics, but what if I fail? What if people don't like my baking, or I can't handle the business side? Or, then we'll figure out what went wrong and fix it. That's what business partners do. That afternoon, they returned to the building to meet with Eddie and get renovations started. As they discussed timelines and logistics, Sarah began to see the empty space transform in her mind. She could picture customers browsing display cases filled with fresh pastries, the warm light from the windows highlighting the rustic brick walls, the satisfying hum of a business running smoothly. I want to call it Second Rise, she said suddenly. Jake looked up from the electrical plans. What? The bakery. I want to call it Second Rise Bakery. It's a baking term when you let bread dough rise twice. It develops better flavor and texture. But it also means, well, second chances, Eddie grinned. I like it. Got a nice ring to it. Second Rise it is, Jake agreed. We'll need signage, business cards, maybe a simple website. As the afternoon progressed, a small crowd gathered outside the windows. Word had spread quickly about the renovation project, and curious townspeople wanted to see what Jake Morrison was up to. Sarah watched them through the glass, recognizing some faces from high school, wondering what they were thinking. They're not all going to be supportive, Jake warned, following her gaze. Some people are going to resent an outsider coming in with big city ideas. I'm not an outsider, Sarah said firmly. I grew up here. This is my home too. You are, and you aren't, Jake said gently. You left, and now you're coming back with help from the richest man in town. Some people are going to see that as an unfair advantage. What do you suggest? Win them over one customer at a time. Make your food so good that objections become irrelevant. That evening, Sarah insisted on cooking dinner as a way to thank Jake for everything he was doing. She prepared herb-crusted pork tenderloin with roasted root vegetables and a bread pudding that made Jake close his eyes in appreciation after the first bite. This is what you're going to serve at the bakery? He asked. This is just home cooking, Sarah said. Wait until I really show you what I can do. After dinner, Jake excused himself to handle ranch business, leaving Sarah alone with her thoughts for the first time since he'd found her. She walked through his house, noting details she'd missed before, family photos showing Jake at various ranch events, awards for cattle breeding, a shelf of books that revealed interests in history, poetry, and sustainable agriculture. In the study, she found a framed newspaper clipping from 15 years ago. Local rancher wins state breeding competition. The photo showed a younger Jake standing beside a massive bull, grinning with pride and satisfaction. She could see traces of the boy she'd known in that man's face, but also the confidence and success that came from years of hard work and smart decisions. That was Thunderbolt, Jake said from the doorway, startling her. Best bull I ever owned. Sired some of the finest cattle in Texas. You look happy, Sarah observed, studying the photo. I was. That was the year I knew the ranch was going to make it, that I'd built something sustainable and profitable. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I'd stayed? If we'd tried to make it work back then? Jake was quiet for a long moment. I used to wonder about that every day. But I've learned that wondering about the past is less useful than planning for the future. Wise words from a successful rancher. Hard-earned words from someone who spent too many years looking backward instead of forward. They settled on the couch with coffee, and Sarah found herself studying Jake's profile in the lamplight. He'd aged well, the lines around his eyes spoke of years spent outdoors, and the gray threading through his dark hair made him look distinguished rather than old. But more than his appearance, it was his calm confidence that attracted her. This was a man who knew who he was and what he wanted from life. Jake, she said carefully, Can I ask you something personal? Shoot. When your marriage ended, did you think about trying to find me? Jake turned to look at her, his expression unreadable. I did more than think about it. I hired a private investigator. Sarah's coffee cup stopped halfway to her lips. What? About 3 years ago, right after the divorce was finalized. I was feeling sorry for myself and wondering about roads not taken. The investigator found some employment records in California, but the trail went cold after that. He said you'd basically disappeared from any traceable records. That's when I was homeless, Sarah said quietly, living off the grid, trying to avoid my ex-husband and his lawyers. I'm sorry I couldn't find you then. Maybe if I had, maybe nothing, Sarah interrupted. I wasn't ready for help 3 years ago. I was still blaming everyone else for my problems, still using substances to cope with reality. If you'd found me then, I probably would have taken your money and disappeared again. And now? Now I'm clean, sober, and ready to take responsibility for my own life. Now I can accept help because I'm prepared to do the work that comes with it. Jake nodded slowly. That makes sense. Recovery isn't just about getting clean, is it? It's about learning to live without whatever you were using to escape. Exactly. And I was using drugs to escape from the life I'd built, a life where I'd given up all my dreams and let other people make my decisions. Getting clean meant facing the fact that I'd made choices that led me away from who I really was. And who are you really? Sarah considered the question carefully. I'm someone who creates things that bring joy to other people. Someone who works hard and takes pride in doing things right. Someone who's been knocked down but isn't staying down. That's the woman I want as a business partner, Jake said with a smile. As the evening wound down, Sarah felt a contentment she hadn't experienced in years. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, dealing with contractors, finalizing equipment orders, beginning the 1,000 small tasks that went into opening a business. But tonight, she was safe, purposeful, and surrounded by possibility. Jake, she said as they prepared to go to their separate bedrooms, I know I keep saying this, but thank you. Not just for the money or the business opportunity, but for believing in me when I'd stopped believing in myself. Thank you for letting me help, Jake replied. For giving me the chance to be part of something meaningful again. As Sarah fell asleep that night, she thought about second chances and second rises, about the mysterious ways life circles back on itself to offer opportunities for redemption. She thought about the bakery that would soon bear her touch, the customers who would taste her creations, the life she was finally ready to build on her own terms. In 6 weeks, Second Rise Bakery would open its doors, and Sarah Chun would find out whether a woman who'd lost everything could indeed rise again. But tonight, surrounded by safety and possibility, she was ready to believe that some stories do get second chances and happy endings. The sound of construction equipment woke Sarah at dawn on Monday morning. Through her bedroom window, she could see Eddie's crew already at work on the bakery, and the sight sent a thrill of nervous excitement through her chest. This was really happening. Jake had left early for a cattle auction in Fort Worth, but he'd pinned a note to the coffee maker. Don't let Eddie talk you out of the extra electrical outlets. You'll need them. Back Wednesday. Jairus smiled at his thoughtfulness. Even when handling his own business, Jake was thinking about hers. She dressed carefully in dark jeans and a professional-looking blouse, then drove into town to check on the renovation progress. The sight that greeted her made her stomach clench with anxiety. Half the main street seemed to be gathered outside the bakery, watching Eddie's crew tear out old fixtures and discussing the project in voices that carried clear disapproval. $50,000 worth of equipment, she heard Gladys Peterson telling her friend Marge. That's what I heard from Tom Bradley. Can you imagine spending that kind of money on a bakery in a town this size? Especially backing someone who's been gone for 20 years, Marge replied. What does she know about what people here want to eat? Sarah took a deep breath and approached the group. Good morning, ladies. I'm Sarah Chun. I'll be running the bakery. Gladys looked her up and down with undisguised skepticism. We know who you are, dear. Question is, do you know what you're getting yourself into? I hope so, Sarah replied pleasantly. I've been baking professionally for years, and I'm excited to bring some new options to Millbrook. New options, Marge snorted. Martha's been feeding this town just fine for 30 years. Seems awfully presumptuous to assume we need something different. I'm not trying to compete with Martha, Sarah said carefully. She does wonderful home-style cooking. I'm planning to focus on fresh pastries, artisanal breads, specialty cakes, things that complement what she offers. At what prices? Gladys demanded. Because working folks in this town can't afford to pay $5 for a muffin just because it's got a fancy name. Sarah felt her temper flare but kept her voice level. My prices will be fair and competitive. Quality ingredients cost more than mass-produced items, but I believe good food is worth paying a little extra for. Easy to say when Jake Morrison's footing the bill. Someone muttered from the back of the group. The comment hit its mark, and Sarah felt her cheeks burn. But before she could respond, a new voice cut through the tension. Seems to me folks are awful quick to judge something they haven't even tasted yet. Sarah turned to see a woman about her own age approaching with a confident stride. She had short gray hair, intelligent eyes, and the kind of presence that commanded attention without demanding it. I'm Dr. Helen Rodriguez, the woman said, extending her hand to Sarah. I run the medical clinic here in town. I've been hoping someone would open a decent bakery. I'm tired of driving to Austin every time I want a proper croissant. Thank you, Sarah said, grateful for the support. I promise you won't be disappointed. Dr. Rodriguez turned to address the skeptical crowd. You know, when I moved here 5 years ago, plenty of people questioned whether Millbrook needed a full-time doctor. Said we'd always gotten by fine with Doc Williams making house calls twice a week. But sometimes progress means adding services that improve everyone's quality of life, Gladys huffed. Comparing medical care to fancy pastries is hardly the same thing. Both serve the community, Dr. Rodriguez replied calmly. Both require skill and training. Both deserve a chance to prove their worth. The crowd began to disperse, but not before Sarah caught several more disapproving comments. It was clear that her return to Millbrook was going to be more challenging than she'd anticipated. Don't let them get to you, Dr. Rodriguez said once they were alone. Small towns resist change, but they also appreciate quality once they experience it. You just have to prove yourself. Any advice on how to do that? Start with the kids. Win over the teenagers and young families, and the older generation will follow eventually. And maybe consider some community outreach. Donate something to the school fundraiser. Provide treats for the church social. Show people you're invested in more than just profit. Dr. Rodriguez's suggestion proved prophetic. That afternoon, Sarah received a call from Jenny Walsh, the high school guidance counselor. I heard you're opening a bakery, Jenny said. We're doing a career fair next month, and I wondered if you'd be willing to participate. Talk to the kids about entrepreneurship and the food service industry. I'd be honored, Sarah replied, then had an inspiration. What if I brought samples? Nothing fancy, just some fresh cookies or muffins to give the kids a taste of what the bakery will offer. That would be wonderful. The fair is on Friday, October 5th. Could you handle about 200 students? Sarah did quick calculations. 200 cookies would cost maybe $40 in ingredients, but could win over an entire generation of potential customers. Absolutely. I'll bring chocolate chip cookies and maybe some apple cinnamon muffins. After hanging up, Sarah realized she just committed to producing 200 baked goods without access to her equipment. The renovation was still in early stages, and her new ovens wouldn't arrive for another 3 weeks. The solution came from an unexpected source. Martha herself appeared at the renovation site, just as Sarah was explaining her predicament to Eddie. "You need oven space?" Martha asked without preamble. "You can use mine. After the lunch rush, my kitchen's free until dinner prep." Sarah stared at her in surprise. "Really? After this morning, I thought you might see me as competition." Martha laughed, a genuine sound that transformed her weathered face. "Honey, I've been running that diner for 30 years. I know the difference between competition and compliment. You're not going to steal my breakfast and lunch crowds, and I'm sure not staying open late enough to compete with your dessert business. That's incredibly generous of you." "It's practical," Martha corrected. "You succeed, you bring more food traffic to Main Street. That helps all of us. Besides, I'm curious to see what all the fuss is about." The next morning, Sarah found herself in Martha's kitchen for the first time, working alongside the woman who'd fed Millbrook for 3 decades. The space was cramped compared to what she was used to, but it was clean, well-organized, and filled with the comfortable energy of a kitchen that saw constant use. "These are your grandmother's mixing bowls?" Martha asked, watching Sarah measure ingredients with practiced precision. "They are. She taught me to bake when I was 8 years old. Said a woman who could feed people well would never want friends. Smart lady. What's your secret with chocolate chip cookies?" "Mine always come out too flat or too thick." Sarah was happy to share techniques, the importance of room temperature ingredients, the way brown butter added depth of flavor, the trick of chilling the dough for exactly 30 minutes before baking. As they worked side by side, she realized Martha was evaluating more than just her recipes. She was assessing Sarah's work ethic, her respect for kitchen safety, her attitude toward collaboration. "You're not what I expected," Martha said as Sarah's first batch came out of the oven, perfectly golden and smelling like childhood memories. "What did you expect? Some fancy city girl who looked down on small-town cooking. Instead, I get someone who knows her way around a kitchen and isn't afraid to get her hands dirty." The cookies were a revelation. Even Sarah, critical of her own work, had to admit they were exceptional. The texture was perfect, crispy edges with soft, chewy centers, and the flavor balance was sophisticated without being pretentious. "Sweet. Mary and Joseph," Martha breathed after tasting one. "That's not a cookie, that's a religious experience." Word of the cookies spread through town with impressive speed. By noon, a steady stream of people were finding excuses to visit the diner, hoping to catch a glimpse of Sarah's baking. Martha, with the wisdom of an experienced businesswoman, offered small samples to regular customers, creating a buzz of anticipation for the bakery's opening. "This is marketing genius," Dr. Rodriguez said when she stopped by for lunch. "You're creating demand before you even open." But not everyone was impressed. That afternoon, Sarah overheard Carl Hendricks talking to Tom Bradley outside the bank. "It's not right," Carl was saying. "Jake Morrison throwing money around like that, setting up his girlfriend in a business that'll probably fail within a year. Meanwhile, my daughter's been trying to get a loan to expand her photography studio, and the bank tells her the market won't support it." "Sarah's not Jake's girlfriend," Tom replied mildly. "They're business partners." "Come on, Tom, you really believe that? A man doesn't invest that kind of money in someone he's not sleeping with." Sarah felt her face burn with shame and anger. She'd known this kind of talk was inevitable, but hearing it voiced so crudely still stung. More importantly, it threatened to undermine everything she was trying to build. That evening, she called Jake in Fort Worth to tell him about both the success with Martha and the ongoing gossip problem. "The cookies sound amazing," Jake said. "And Martha's support is worth its weight in gold. She's got more influence in this town than the mayor. But the gossip is getting worse. People are openly saying I'm your mistress, that this whole thing is some kind of elaborate kept woman arrangement." Jake was quiet for a moment. "What do you want to do about it?" "I don't know. Part of me wants to march into every business on Main Street and set the record straight. But I also know that protesting too much might make things worse. You're right about that. Small-town gossip has its own momentum. Fighting it directly usually just feeds it. So what do? We stay professional, keep our distance in public, and let your work speak for itself. Eventually, people will see that you're running a legitimate business, not playing house with me. Is that going to be enough? It'll have to be. Unless you want to quit before you've even started. The suggestion stung, partly because Sarah had been considering exactly that. It would be so much easier to walk away now, before she'd invested too much emotional energy, before she'd proven the gossips right by failing. I'm not quitting, she said firmly. I'm just scared. Good, Jake said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. If you weren't scared, I'd be worried you weren't taking this seriously enough. The next day brought Sarah's first real test. She arrived at Martha's kitchen to find Gladys Peterson waiting with 2 other women from the church auxiliary. We heard you were doing some kind of audition, Gladys said without preamble. Thought we should see what all the excitement about. Sarah recognized the challenge for what it was. These women were the unofficial tastemakers of Millbrook's social scene. Their approval or disapproval could make or break her bakery before it even opened. I'm just practicing for the high school career fair, Sarah said carefully. But you're welcome to try whatever I make. She decided to prepare 3 different items: the chocolate chip cookies that had already proven successful, banana bread that showcased her skill with quick breads, and cinnamon rolls that would demonstrate her ability with yeasted doughs. Each recipe was chosen to highlight different techniques while remaining approachable to conservative palates. As she worked, the women watched with the intensity of judges at a competition. They commented on her technique, questioned her ingredient choices, and made pointed observations about the cost of vanilla beans versus artificial vanilla extract. Awful lot of trouble for something people could just buy at the grocery store. One of them remarked as Sarah shaped cinnamon rolls with practiced efficiency. Different tools for different jobs, Sarah replied diplomatically. Grocery store baked goods serve their purpose, but they're made for shelf life and mass production, not flavor and texture. When the baking was finished, Sarah plated small portions of each item and set them in front of her impromptu panel of judges. The room fell silent except for the sounds of chewing and the occasional murmur of evaluation. Gladys tried each item, methodically, her expression giving nothing away. When she finished, she sat back and studied Sarah with calculating eyes. Well? Sarah asked, unable to bear the suspense. They're good, Gladys admitted grudgingly. Better than good, actually. That cinnamon roll is the best I've had since my grandmother died. High praise coming from you, Martha observed from across the kitchen. Don't let it go to your head, Gladys warned Sarah. Good baking is just the beginning. Running a successful business takes a lot more than knowing how to mix flour and sugar. You're absolutely right, Sarah agreed, but it's a start. As the women prepared to leave, Gladys turned back to Sarah with an expression that might have been approval. I'm planning my granddaughter's wedding reception for next spring, she said. If your bakery's still open and you're still making food this good, I might consider having you do the cake. It was a conditional endorsement at best, but Sarah recognized it as a significant victory. Gladys Peterson's granddaughter's wedding would be one of the social events of the year. Catering it would establish Sarah's reputation more effectively than any advertising campaign. I'd be honored, Sarah said simply. After the women left, Martha helped Sarah clean up the kitchen, both women working in comfortable silence. You handled that well, Martha said finally. Gladys was testing you, and you passed. Barely. Sometimes barely is enough. In this town, respect is earned one person at a time, one interaction at a time. You just earned yours with 3 of the most influential women in Millbrook. As Sarah drove back to Jake's ranch that evening, she reflected on how much her life had changed in just 1 week. 7 days ago, she'd been homeless and desperate. Now she was planning menus, managing construction schedules, and navigating small-town politics like the businesswoman she was becoming. The road ahead was still uncertain, full of challenges she couldn't anticipate and obstacles she'd have to overcome one by one. But for the first time in years, Sarah Chun felt like she was moving toward something instead of running away from something. And that, she realized, made all the difference in the world. 3 weeks into the renovation, disaster struck. Sarah arrived at the bakery on a rainy Thursday morning to find Eddie's crew standing around looking grim. Water was dripping steadily through the ceiling, pooling on the newly installed hardwood floors. "Roof leak," Eddie explained, pointing to a spreading stain on the ceiling. "Must have been a weak spot that finally gave way. The good news is it's fixable. The bad news is we'll need to replace about half the flooring and delay the opening by at least 2 weeks." Sarah felt her carefully constructed timeline crumbling. The high school career fair was in 10 days, followed by her planned soft opening. The following week, equipment deliveries were scheduled, staff interviews arranged, marketing materials printed with the opening date. "How much?" she asked, dreading the answer. "Roof repair, new flooring, lost time." "Probably $8,000. Sarah's heart sank. Jake was still in Fort Worth, dealing with a complicated cattle purchase, and she hated the thought of calling him with more expenses. The project was already over budget, and now this. "I need to make some calls," she told Eddie. "Can you give me an hour before you start anything?" Outside, Sarah sat in her car and tried to think. The delay would cost more than just money. It would give the town gossips more time to spread doubt about her competence, more opportunities for people like Carl Hendricks to predict her failure. Her phone rang. Jake's name appeared on the screen. "How did you know I needed to talk to you?" she asked without preamble. "Eddie called me about the roof. I'm already on my way back." "Jake, I'm so sorry. This is exactly the kind of thing people predicted would happen. They're going to say I can't even manage a simple renovation. They're going to say whatever they want to say regardless. The question is, do you still want to do this?" Sarah looked at the water-stained building that was supposed to become her dream. "More than ever. Then we fix the roof and keep going. I'll be there in 2 hours. Jake arrived with solutions. He'd already contacted a roofing contractor who could start immediately, found a flooring supplier with the exact planks needed in stock, and arranged for expedited delivery of everything required to get back on schedule. "The career fair can still happen," he told Sarah as they surveyed the damage. "We'll set up in the front section where there's no water damage. It'll actually be perfect. Kids can see the renovation in progress, get excited about being part of something new." But the real surprise came that afternoon when Martha appeared with a crew of volunteers. Word had spread about Sarah's setback, and the response wasn't mockery, it was help. Gladys organized it. Martha explained as women from the church auxiliary began moving equipment to protect it from further water damage. Said anyone who could make cinnamon rolls that good deserved a fighting chance. Dr. Rodriguez arrived with medical supplies for treating minor injuries. Tom Bradley showed up with his son and son-in-law to help with the heavy lifting. Even Pete Martinez closed his garage early to lend a hand. "I don't understand," Sarah said to Jake, watching the impromptu work crew. "Half these people have been skeptical about the bakery from the beginning." "Small towns work differently than you remember," Jake replied. "They'll argue about your choices and question your decisions, but when disaster strikes, they show up." By evening, the damaged materials had been removed, protective tarps installed, and a clear plan established for repairs. Sarah stood in the middle of her water-damaged dream, surrounded by people who were supposed to be her critics, and felt something she hadn't experienced since childhood, the support of a true community. "Thank you," she said to the assembled group. "I don't know how to repay this." "Make good pastries and treat people fair," Gladys said briskly. "That's enough payment." The next few days passed in a blur of controlled chaos. The roof was repaired, new flooring installed, and equipment began arriving on schedule. Sarah worked alongside the contractors, learning every inch of her future workspace, making adjustments and improvements as they became apparent. Jake was a constant presence, handling logistics and problem-solving with the kind of calm efficiency that had built his ranching empire. But he was careful to let Sarah make the final decisions, to ensure everyone understood this was her business, her vision being brought to life. "You're good at this," Sarah told him one evening as they reviewed the day's progress. "I've built a few things in my time." "No, I mean you're good at helping without taking over. A lot of men in your position would want to run everything themselves." Jake considered this. "I learned the hard way that success isn't about controlling everything. It's about finding good people and giving them what they need to succeed." The career fair arrived with perfect timing. The bakery's front section was pristine, showcasing gleaming new equipment and the promise of what was to come. Sarah had spent the previous day baking at Martha's, producing 250 cookies and muffins that disappeared within the first hour. "These are incredible," said Jamie Walsh, a senior planning to study culinary arts. "Did you really learn to make these just from your grandmother?" "She taught me the basics," Sarah replied, "but I spent years in professional kitchens learning techniques and developing my own style. That's what I'd recommend for anyone interested in food service. Learn the fundamentals, then find your own voice." The teenagers were enthusiastic and curious, asking detailed questions about ingredient sourcing, profit margins, and the business side of food service. Several expressed interest in part-time work, and Sarah found herself genuinely excited about the prospect of mentoring young people, but the real validation came from the adults who attended. Parents who had been skeptical about the bakery found themselves impressed by Sarah's professionalism and obvious expertise. By the end of the day, she had advance orders for 3 birthday cakes and a promise from the school principal to consider her for the graduation reception catering. "You've won them over," Jake observed as they drove home that evening. "Some of them, maybe. But I noticed Carl Hendricks didn't bring his daughter by to try anything. Carl's got his own issues with me that have nothing to do with you. Don't let one holdout spoil your victory." That weekend brought the soft opening, an invitation-only event for friends, family, and key community members. Sarah had spent weeks planning the menu: fresh croissants and Danish pastries, artisanal breads, a selection of cookies and muffins, and her signature chocolate cake cut into generous samples. The transformation of the space was stunning. What had been a tired hardware store was now a warm, welcoming bakery with exposed brick walls, polished hardwood floors, and vintage-style display cases that showcase Sarah's creations like edible art. "My God," Dr. Rodriguez breathed as she surveyed the spread. "This looks like something from a magazine." The turnout exceeded Sarah's expectations. Nearly 100 people crowded into the space, sampling food, admiring the renovation, and offering congratulations. Even some of the initial skeptics seemed impressed by the quality and presentation. But the moment that would become legend in Millbrook happened when Gladys Peterson approached the counter where Sarah was serving samples. "I want to place an order," Gladys announced loudly enough for half the room to hear. "Of course," Sarah replied. "What can I make for you?" "Everything," Gladys said. "The cake, the catering, the whole reception for my granddaughter's wedding. 200 guests, finest event this town's seen in years, and I want you to handle the desserts." The room fell silent. Gladys Peterson's granddaughter's wedding was the social event of the decade, with guests coming from as far as Dallas and Houston. The catering contract would be worth thousands of dollars and establish Sarah's reputation permanently. "Mrs. Peterson," Sarah said carefully, "are you sure? This is a big responsibility, and I've only been open for 1 day. "Honey," Gladys replied. With the first genuine smile Sarah had seen from her, I've been eating food in this town for 73 years. I know quality when I taste it. And what you've created here isn't just good, it's extraordinary." The applause that followed was spontaneous and heartfelt. In that moment, Sarah realized she had achieved something she'd never dared to hope for: complete acceptance by the community that had once seemed determined to reject her. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Sarah found herself alone with Jake in the bakery for the first time. They stood together in the space they had created, surrounded by empty plates and the lingering aroma of fresh pastries. "We did it," Sarah said softly. "You did it," Jake corrected. "I just provided the initial investment. It was more than money. And you know it. This wouldn't have happened without your belief in me." Jake turned to face her, and for a moment, the careful professional distance they had maintained dissolved. "Sarah, I need you to know something. This was never about the past or trying to recapture what we used to have. This was about seeing who you could become and wanting to be part of that journey. And now that the journey's begun, now I'm proud to be your business partner. And maybe, when you're ready and if you're interested, I'd like to see what else we might build together." The kiss that followed was different from the desperate teenage passion they had shared decades ago. It was the kiss of two adults who had lived through loss and disappointment, who understood the value of second chances and the courage required to take them. When they finally broke apart, Sarah was crying. "Happy tears?" Jake asked, gently wiping her cheeks. "The happiest," Sarah replied. "For the first time in 23 years, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." As they turned off the lights and locked the door of Second Rise Bakery, neither of them could have predicted how their story would inspire the entire community. Within a year, 3 other new businesses would open on Main Street. The local unemployment rate would drop to historic lows, and Millbrook would transform from a sleepy ranch town into a destination known throughout Texas for its entrepreneurial spirit and community support. But that night, standing outside her bakery with the man who had never stopped believing in her, Sarah Chun was content to simply be a woman who had lost everything and found her way home. The rancher who had seen his childhood love begging on courthouse steps had indeed done something that left the town speechless. He had given her the chance to save herself, and in doing so, he had discovered that sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone isn't money or opportunity, but the simple recognition that they deserve both. 6 months after Second Rise Bakery opened its doors, the transformation of Millbrook was undeniable. What had started as one man's investment in a struggling woman had become something neither Jake nor Sarah could have anticipated: catalyst for an entire community's renaissance. The bakery's success exceeded every projection. Sarah's morning croissants sold out daily by 9 a.m., forcing her to hire 2 additional bakers just to meet demand. Weekend customers drove from Austin and San Antonio, creating traffic jams on Main Street that the town hadn't seen since the 1950s. The wedding cake business alone generated more revenue than Sarah had projected for the entire first year. But the real surprise was what happened to the rest of Millbrook. Marcus Thompson, a recent college graduate, opened a specialty coffee roastery 2 doors down from the bakery, partnering with Sarah to create unique blends that complemented her pastries. The old feed store became Hill Country Crafts, featuring work by local artisans whose pottery and textiles attracted shoppers from across Central Texas. Even the abandoned gas station at the edge of town found new life as a farmer's market pavilion, drawing vendors who had previously sold only in Austin. "It's like watching dominoes fall in reverse," Dr. Rodriguez told Sarah one afternoon as they watched tourists photograph the newly painted murals on Main Street. "Instead of everything collapsing, everything's building up." The economic impact was measurable and profound. Property values increased by 30%. Unemployment dropped to 2.8%, the lowest in county history. The school district, previously struggling with budget cuts, suddenly found itself able to fund art and music programs that had been eliminated years earlier. But perhaps the most significant change was in the town's attitude toward possibility itself. People are dreaming bigger, Mayor Janet Collins explained during a town hall meeting celebrating Millbrook's designation as Small Business Community of the Year by the Texas Department of Commerce. Sarah and Jake showed us that taking calculated risks on good people leads to success that benefits everyone. The recognition brought reporters from Dallas and Houston, all wanting to understand how a failing ranch town had reinvented itself. Every article mentioned the same origin story: a successful rancher who had found his childhood sweetheart, homeless, and invested in her potential rather than simply her immediate needs. "What made you believe she could succeed when she couldn't even afford a place to sleep?" asked a journalist from Texas Monthly. Jake's answer became the quote that defined not just their story, but Millbrook's transformation. "I didn't invest in where Sarah was. I invested in who she could become." That's what communities should do for each other: see potential, not just problems. The attention brought unexpected opportunities. A cable television network wanted to film a documentary about Millbrook's renaissance. A major food magazine featured Second Rise Bakery in their Hidden Gems of Texas issue. Tourism officials began including Millbrook in their recommended weekend destinations, citing the town's authentic small-town charm with sophisticated amenities. Through it all, Sarah and Jake navigated their evolving relationship with the same careful attention they brought to business decisions. Their romance rekindled slowly, built on mutual respect and shared goals, rather than teenage passion and impossible promises. "We're different people than we were at 17, Sarah told her sponsor Maria during one of their weekly calls. "But we're compatible people. He challenges me to think bigger, and I help him remember that success means more than just accumulating wealth." Their engagement, announced at the one-year anniversary celebration of Second Rise Bakery, surprised no one. By then, the entire town had watched them build something beautiful together, first a business, then a relationship. Finally, a life that honored both their individual strengths and their partnership. The wedding, held in the town square under lights strung between oak trees, became Millbrook's largest celebration in decades. Sarah wore her grandmother's pearl necklace and a dress she designed herself. Jake's best man was Eddie Morrison, the contractor who had helped build Sarah's dream into reality. The cake, naturally, came from Second Rise Bakery, 5 tiers of Sarah's signature chocolate creation that guests would talk about for years. But the most memorable moment came during Jake's speech at the reception. "A year and a half ago," he said, addressing the crowd gathered in the square where Sarah had once sat with a cardboard sign, "I thought I was successful because I owned a lot of land and made a lot of money. But Sarah taught me that real success is measured by the good you do for other people and the opportunities you create for your community." He gestured toward Main Street, now bustling with activity even on a Sunday evening. "What you see around you, the new businesses, the jobs, the sense of possibility, that didn't happen because I wrote a check. It happened because Sarah had the courage to start over, and because all of you had the wisdom to support something that made your town better." The applause that followed echoed off the buildings that had once housed empty storefronts and broken dreams, but now sheltered thriving businesses and ambitious entrepreneurs. As the evening wound down, Sarah and Jake walked through their town, and it was their town now, in a way it had never been when they were teenagers dreaming under the oak tree. They had not only found their way back to each other, but had helped create a place where other people's dreams could flourish. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd driven past that morning?" Sarah asked as they stood outside the bakery, its windows dark, but its success evident in every detail. "Every day," Jake admitted, "but not because I regret stopping. Because I can't imagine any other choice leading to this." He gestured at the transformed Main Street, at the life they had built, at the future they were creating together. Sometimes the best decisions feel inevitable in retrospect, like they were the only possible choice. 3 years later, second. Rye's Bakery had become the anchor of a thriving downtown district that attracted visitors from across the state. Sarah had opened a culinary school in the renovated train depot, teaching both traditional techniques and innovative approaches to a new generation of bakers and chefs. Jake had expanded his ranch operations to include agritourism, hosting visitors who wanted to experience authentic Texas ranch life. The story of the rancher who saw his childhood, love begging, and changed both their lives had become part of Millbrook's identity, a reminder that transformational change often begins with one person seeing possibility, where others see only problems. But perhaps the most important transformation was the one that couldn't be measured in economic statistics or tourism revenue. Millbrook had rediscovered something many small towns lose in the modern world: the belief that communities can shape their own destinies through the simple act of investing in each other's potential. On quiet mornings, before the bakery opened and the tourists arrived, Sarah would sometimes walk through the town square, where her lowest moment had become the beginning of her greatest triumph. She would think about second chances and second rises, about the mysterious alchemy that transforms individual dreams into community transformation. She would remember sitting on courthouse steps with a cardboard sign, believing her story was over, not knowing that the man who would change everything was just around the corner. And she would smile, understanding finally that some endings are actually beginnings, and some rescue stories are really about learning to save yourself. Rancher who had stopped for his childhood love hadn't just given her a business opportunity. He had reminded her who she was capable of becoming. And in doing so, he had shown an entire community that the most powerful investment anyone can make is believing in someone's potential to rise again. In Millbrook, Texas, they had learned that sometimes the best way to change your own life is to give someone else the chance to change theirs. And that lesson had indeed left the whole town speechless, not with shock, but with the quiet wonder that comes from witnessing ordinary people do extraordinary things for each other. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.